A young Navy SEAL thought his mission was routine until the mountain beneath his feet began to tremble like it was alive. His German shepherd sensed it first, a warning hidden in the earth, a sound no human could hear, a danger powerful enough to wipe out an entire town. What they uncovered wasn't science. It was a secret buried by greed, protected by God, and waiting for the right man to reveal it. Their mission became a miracle, one that would change lives forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. The storm had not yet reached Harbor Point, but the wind carried the taste of it. Salt, iron, and something faintly electric. The ocean below the cliffs rolled with the slow patience of a predator, and above it stood an abandoned observation house pressed into the basalt. That was where Petty Officer Jason Cole arrived, 2 days after his briefing in San Diego, following orders stamped with a red seal he didn't fully understand. The assignment was simple on paper: investigate irregular seismic readings and potential illegal drilling by a private water corporation operating under federal contract. In reality, it was a political mess, wrapped in environmental camouflage. Jason had seen enough of those. Missions dressed as maintenance, cleanup, or aid that ended with classified files and empty promises. Still, he took the job. Doing nothing was worse than walking back into another storm. He parked the government Jeep on the gravel shoulder and let the engine die. Silence folded over him except for the rhythmic crash of waves. From the back seat, Ranger lifted his head. The German shepherd's ears tilted forward, eyes sharp, reading the air as if decoding a message only he could hear. Jason met his gaze and nodded. "We're here, partner." Ranger had served beside him once during a coastal rescue operation in the Arabian Sea that went wrong. 5 men were saved. 2 were not. Since then, neither man nor dog had learned to rest easy in quiet places. Inside the observation house, dust lay thick as frost. The smell of salt and rusted metal filled the room. The equipment, radio consoles, pressure gauges, old hydrophones, sat frozen in time. Jason ran a gloved hand across one of the control panels. "Decommissioned 15 years ago," he muttered. But someone had been here recently. A half-burned candle rested on the windowsill. Next to it, a thermos cup still held the scent of fresh coffee. He unpacked his field tablet, syncing it with the portable sensor hub. The satellite feed flickered, then stabilized, pulling data from the ridge. Temperature low, pressure unstable. Seismic tremors. Subsurface frequency not natural. Jason frowned. "It's rhythmic," he said quietly, "not tectonic." Ranger stood beside him, head slightly tilted, listening to the faint hum that vibrated through the floorboards. Jason opened the mission folder again, skimming through background notes. Blue Rock Water Holdings, publicly listed as a hydrology contractor for government drought projects, privately suspected of deep extraction operations beyond legal depth. The locals had filed noise complaints for months, low humming at night, rattling windows, dry wells, but federal inspectors dismissed them. That was when a retired officer named Captain Hensley, one of Jason's old mentors, reached out through back channels. "They need someone who won't file the wrong report," he'd said. "You still know how to listen, don't you?" Jason wasn't sure what Hensley meant then. Now, with the air vibrating under his boots, he thought he did. Listening wasn't just hearing. It was feeling when something alive had been wounded. He walked the perimeter of the structure, checking the cliff edge. The Pacific stretched wide and gray beneath him, flecked with whitecaps. Far off, an oil tanker silhouette drifted south. One of Blue Rock's supply routes, perhaps. The sun broke briefly through clouds, lighting a glint of metal below, a capped pipeline emerging from the basalt, almost invisible under the moss. The coordinates matched none of the official maps. Jason crouched. The pipeline pulsed faintly, vibrating against the rock as if something inside were alive. He placed his hand on the cold surface. It reminded him of the time in Afghanistan when they'd found an illegal oil tap in an abandoned well. The same artificial heartbeat, the same mechanical whisper of greed. He could almost hear Captain Hensley's voice. "You fight wars that never make the news, son, and sometimes the enemy doesn't wear a uniform." Ranger growled low beside him, not alarm, but recognition. Jason felt the vibration travel up his arm and into his chest, merging with his own pulse. He withdrew his hand, slowly. "You feel that too, don't you?" Ranger's eyes stayed on the pipe, unwavering. Back inside, Jason recorded his first field note. Harbor Point site shows evidence of industrial installation under false registry. Subsurface resonance patterns resemble harmonic pumping at illegal depth. He paused, thumb hovering above the keyboard. Then he added, "Moral environment compromised. Proceeding without official clearance until confirmation." The decision weighed on him. He was no longer under active Navy command. If he crossed jurisdictional lines, there'd be no cover. But doing nothing meant leaving the wound to fester, and he couldn't live with that silence again. Ranger circled once and lay down by the door, tail twitching, body tense even in rest. Jason poured water into a metal bowl and sat beside him on the floor. Outside, the wind shifted. The first drops of rain hit the roof like distant gunfire. He leaned back against the wall and stared at the flickering data on the screen. Beneath the numbers, the world hummed like a secret trying to reach him. He closed his eyes briefly and thought of the last mission, of the sound of collapsing steel, of voices cut off mid-sentence. Guilt, like seawater, had a way of finding every crack and filling it until you drowned. But this assignment, maybe, was a way to breathe again, to fix something before it broke completely. The radio on the table crackled unexpectedly, static, then a faint voice. "Cole, do you read?" It was Hensley's tone, older, thinner, but unmistakable. "They're moving faster than we thought. Stay alert. Watch the ridge." The line cut out before Jason could answer. He looked at Ranger. The dog was already standing, ears pricked toward the ocean. Lightning flashed far out at sea, painting the horizon in a single blinding frame. For a heartbeat, Jason thought he saw shapes on the lower trail, lights moving where no road should be. Then darkness swallowed them again. He shut down the radio, grabbed his pack, and checked his sidearm out of habit. The mission had just changed from observation to contact. He wasn't sure who was out there or how deep the corruption went, but he knew this much. Blue Rock wasn't just stealing water. They were stealing something older, something the earth itself was fighting to keep. As thunder rolled in, Jason stepped out into the storm, Ranger at his side, their silhouettes vanishing into the gray curtain of rain. The wind howled like an old warning carried from the sea, and the mountain beneath their feet answered with a pulse that refused to be ignored. Fog settled low over Harbor Point the next morning, clinging to the cliffs and sliding across the abandoned observation house like a living breath. Jason Cole had slept little. The voice over the radio, the unnatural vibration of the pipeline, the shapes he thought he saw moving during the storm, none of it had left his mind. He woke with the uneasy certainty that whatever was happening beneath the ridge was far more orchestrated than a corporate shortcut. Ranger sensed it too. The dog had spent the early dawn pacing between the front door and the cliff edge, pausing often to listen to the low hum rising from the rocks. It was not fear that drove him, but recognition, the instinct of a creature that had once been trained to detect life, danger, and underground resonance during rescue missions overseas. Jason brewed a quick cup of instant coffee, its bitterness grounding him, and opened his field tablet. The latest readings from the sensors he had set overnight lined up in a pattern that bothered him. The pulses beneath the earth repeated at intervals too precise to be natural, like the slow breathing of a machine pretending to be part of the mountain. He logged the data, marked the coordinates, and strapped his gear onto his pack. "We're checking the house," he said quietly to Ranger. The old research structure, half hidden in the basalt, had belonged to a retired federal hydrologist decades ago. Official records claimed it was abandoned due to structural instability, but the files Jason reviewed hinted the man, Dr. Cecil Raymond, had reported something incompatible with geological expectations before leaving government service entirely. Raymond had vanished from public life afterward. Some said he moved inland. Others believed he had been pushed out for speaking too loudly. Jason wasn't sure which version he believed, but he suspected the truth was buried somewhere in the floorboards. He approached the research house through the fog, the wooden door groaning open under his hand. Ranger entered first, sweeping the room with controlled steps, his breathing steady. Jason's flashlight cut through the dust, revealing shelves of faded notebooks, rusted gauges, and a hydrophone wired into a wall socket that had long lost its power source. He tested the floor with his boot. The vibration was stronger here. Ranger lowered his head and pressed a paw gently against one of the boards, then lifted his gaze toward Jason. It was the same signal he'd given during a collapsed barracks rescue in Yemen. Something was beneath them. Jason knelt and ran his fingers along the seams. The wood felt worn but secure. He found a small metal eyelet nearly flush with the surface. When he tugged it, an entire panel lifted just enough to reveal a recessed handle. Someone had built a hidden hatch, and someone else had gone through great lengths to make sure no one found it easily. With a deep breath, he lifted the section of floor. A waft of cold, mineral-rich air rose from the darkness below. A narrow shaft descended between rock walls reinforced by old metal brackets. A rope ladder hung there, its rungs weathered but intact. Jason whispered, "This is why they wanted the site sealed." Ranger stared into the darkness without hesitation, his body tense but grounded, as if he had expected this moment. Jason tested the ladder, then climbed down slowly, the air growing cooler with each rung. When he reached the bottom, he stepped into a carved chamber, no bigger than a storage room. It was reinforced with beams, cables, and a framework of old research equipment arranged with meticulous purpose. In the center sat another hydrophone system, but larger than the one above, Dr. Raymond's private setup, perhaps. The cables ran through drilled holes in the basalt floor, disappearing into unseen depths. On a table sat stacks of notebooks labeled Subsurface Resonance Year 1 through Year 7. Jason opened the earliest one. The writing was sharp, precise, methodical. The ridge carries an active water vein unlike any known structure. It sings under pressure. Harmonics show intelligence of pattern, not randomness. Jason blinked. Intelligence of pattern was not language a scientist used lightly. The next entry, dated 3 months later, read, "External pulses detected, not natural. Machinery interfering with the rhythm. Artificial pressure diversions must be investigated." Jason turned another page and froze. "I have submitted warnings. They denied the findings. Extraction continues at unregistered depth. If the vein collapses, the entire ridge will shift from the inside." Ranger let out a quiet rumble, as if responding to the tension in the room. Jason placed a steady hand on his fur. "This was bigger than a disagreement," he murmured. They shut him down. He moved to the hydrophone and switched on the backup generator. To his surprise, the equipment responded with a faint glow. A low, trembling hum filled the chamber, rising like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Jason listened closely. The pulse was steady for several seconds before breaking into jagged vibrations, like a signal being choked. Ranger's ears pricked. His body stiffened the way it had during active deployments when explosives or underground voids were detected nearby. "Easy," Jason whispered, though he felt the same tightening inside his chest. The hum changed suddenly. It grew louder, then faint, then loud again, but in a rhythm that mimicked movement, not malfunction. Jason leaned closer to the speaker. He had spent years tracking signals, patterns, and coded transmissions, and whatever the sound was, it was not random. It was responding. To what? He didn't know. Then the hydrophone crackled sharply and cut out. The generator flickered. The pulse beneath the ground went silent, leaving the chamber too quiet. Ranger stepped back, tail low yet unafraid, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Moments later, muffled, footsteps sounded above, slow, deliberate, just heavy enough for the dust to quiver. Jason's breath stilled. Ranger shifted into a guarded stance, no bark, no growl, just readiness. Someone was inside the research house. Jason killed the generator and shut off the hydrophone, plunging the chamber into darkness. He waited, listening. The footsteps moved again, closer to the hatch, then paused as if the intruder was recognizing the disturbance. Jason touched Ranger's shoulder. They had no exit except the rope ladder. Whoever was above knew someone was here. The footsteps shifted again, scraping lightly, approaching the hatch. Jason tightened his grip around his flashlight, mind calculating every possible scenario. But before the hatch opened, a voice, a low male voice, spoke clearly through the floorboards. "You shouldn't be here, Cole." Jason's heartbeat stopped. That voice was familiar, too familiar. Captain Hensley, the man who had sent him here. But something in the tone carried neither concern nor warning, only finality. Ranger's hackles rose at the same instant. The ladder above creaked, signaling the hatch was starting to lift. Mist drifted through the trees outside, as if the entire ridge were holding its breath, waiting to see who would rise from the darkness first. Jason Cole stayed perfectly still in the chamber, one hand on Ranger's shoulder, the other gripping the cold metal of his flashlight. Above them, the hatch creaked again. The sound was unhurried, intentional, the sound of someone who believed he had already won. Ranger did not growl, but his entire frame tightened, a stillness he only displayed when he sensed betrayal. That alone put a cold pressure inside Jason's rib cage. He had trusted Captain Hensley. The man had saved him once in Bahrain when an intel exchange turned into an ambush. Hensley had pulled him behind a broken seawall and joked afterward that Jason owed him a lifetime of beers. That memory clashed violently with the voice that now drifted through the floorboards, stripped of warmth, stripped of camaraderie. "Cole," Hensley repeated. "Climb up slowly, hands visible." Jason considered remaining silent, but Ranger's ears angled back in a silent warning. They had no exit besides the rope ladder, and Hensley already knew their exact location. That meant Hensley had been monitoring him longer than Jason realized. He whispered to Ranger without sound, just a subtle shift of his hand that meant stay behind me no matter what. Then he began the climb. Each rung felt heavier than the last, and as though the walls themselves were resisting his return to the surface. Halfway up, Jason paused, listening. Only one set of breathing above. One person. No backup. That was odd. Hensley didn't operate alone unless he wanted something done quietly. When Jason reached the top, he pushed the hatch open with controlled force and emerged into the dim light of the research house. Hensley stood near the desk, his silhouette sharpened by the pale morning leaking through the window. He looked older than Jason remembered, not in his face, but in the way he held himself. Rigid, almost exhausted. His hands were not visible. That was the first bad sign. "Step away from the hatch," he said. The tone was unmistakable, command, but with an undercurrent that felt heavier than authority. Jason stepped aside, and Ranger climbed up behind him in one fluid motion, positioning himself at Jason's right side. Hensley's gaze flicked to the dog only briefly. "Didn't expect you to bring him." "I don't go anywhere without him," Jason said. His voice carried a calm he did not feel, especially when things don't add up. Hensley exhaled sharply, an irritated sound. "You weren't supposed to find the lower chamber." Jason kept his expression neutral. "Then why send me here?" "I didn't send you," Hensley replied quietly. "I warned you." Jason's mind stuttered. "You sent the orders." "No." Hensley's jaw tightened. "Someone copied my credentials and used my clearance. I only learned yesterday that your deployment file had been moved." Jason felt the room tilt slightly, as if the ridge itself had shifted under the weight of that sentence. Someone had wanted Jason in Harbor Point. Someone with access to military channels. Someone willing to use Hensley's name. Hensley continued, voice low. "Blue Rock isn't just drilling illegally. There's a private stake in it. Someone high enough to bury federal complaints and silence field reports. Raymond tried to expose it. He disappeared." Jason remembered the notebooks in the chamber, the warnings, the precise handwriting that recorded every pulse of the earth like a confession. "Raymond's work proves the ridge is alive under pressure," Jason said, "and they're killing it." Hensley didn't deny it, "which is why you need to leave. Now. This place isn't a mission site anymore. It's a trap." Ranger's body shifted closer to Jason. His instincts were screaming something urgent. Hensley noticed. "The dog knows I'm telling the truth." Jason watched him carefully. "If you're here to help, why come alone?" The older man hesitated. Then he said something Jason didn't expect. "Because I couldn't trust my own unit." That struck deeper than any accusation. Jason opened his mouth to respond, but Ranger suddenly jerked his head toward the window. A low vibration trembled through the floorboards. Then another, and another, not from the pipeline, from the ground itself. Jason moved first. He lunged toward the window, pulling the cracked curtain aside just enough to see the trail below. A vehicle crawled through the fog, black, oversized, and riding low from the weight of equipment. A Blue Rock industrial truck, not a supply truck, a containment unit. Jason had seen the same design near a collapsed tunnel system in Chile. Rigs used to seal off illegal drilling sites, bury evidence, and block access with controlled detonations. "They're going to collapse the chamber," Jason whispered. "They're going to bury everything." Hensley swore under his breath. "They must have picked up your signal last night. We triggered something." "Then we move." Jason grabbed his pack. Ranger was already airborne, sprinting toward the door. "Out the back trail," Hensley said. "It leads to the southern ridge. They won't expect it." But before Jason could follow, a metallic click echoed across the room. Not from Hensley, from outside, a charge being armed. Ranger froze mid-step and swung his head toward the far wall. Jason recognized the sound instantly, the priming of a subterranean compression charge. His pulse hammered. "They're setting explosives under the rock." Hensley's eyes widened. "They're going to bring the entire ridge face down." Ranger barked once, a sharp, urgent warning. Dust rained from the ceiling as the floor vibrated harder, the heartbeat of the mountain turning frantic. Jason locked eyes with Hensley. "We need to run." Hensley pointed toward the rear exit. "Move!" Jason pushed the door open, rain slashing across the clearing, Ranger bolting ahead. Behind them, the earth exhaled a deep groan, as if the ridge itself sensed what was coming. Then the sound Jason feared most rolled through the fog, the slow rising hum of a detonator sequence. And he knew the chamber they had just left was seconds away from becoming a tomb. Wind whipped across the southern ridge as Jason Cole sprinted through the rain, Ranger leading with the precision of a creature who had outrun disasters before. Behind them, the research house groaned under shifting pressure inside the stone. The detonator sequence had entered its final hum, low and drawn out like the last breath of something ancient. Hensley kept pace surprisingly well for a man who claimed to be acting alone. His breath was controlled, steps deliberate, traits of someone who had spent a lifetime outrunning trouble. Jason didn't trust him fully, but he trusted physics. None of them would survive if they stayed near the chamber. Ranger suddenly veered left, cutting across a narrow slope that skirted the cliff. Jason followed instinctively, knowing the dog's choices were shaped by years of sensing collapse patterns after earthquakes and bombardments. Once, during a failed extraction in Pakistan, Ranger had pulled Jason out of a sinking ravine seconds before it gave way. That history lived in the dog's bones, and Jason treated it as gospel. "Where does this trail lead?" Jason shouted toward Hensley. "Toward the old comms tower," Hensley replied. "It's been dead for years, but the structure is stable. We can regroup there." Jason didn't answer. He wasn't sure regrouping would be possible. Not if Blue Rock's men were nearby, not if Hensley was compromised. A deafening crack split the air, and Jason spun instinctively. The research house shuddered violently. Then the entire structure folded inward as the chamber beneath it imploded, sending a plume of stone dust erupting toward the sky. The ground trembled underfoot. Ranger barked sharply, urging Jason to keep moving. Chunks of basalt rolled down the ridge like fleeing animals. Jason felt the vibration in his ribs, the primal warning of a geological failure that could escalate any second. Hensley cursed under his breath. They used a deep-set compression charge, he said. That wasn't meant for evidence control. It was meant for permanent burial. Jason narrowed his eyes. You knew they might go this far? I suspected, Hensley admitted, but not this fast. They're accelerating the project. Jason didn't like the phrasing. Project? Hensley hesitated, then said, There's more at stake here than water theft. Ranger's ears flicked back in discomfort. Jason controlled the urge to confront Hensley right there in the storm. Questions could wait. Survival could not. He pushed forward until the ridge flattened out into a clearing scattered with boulders, remnants of old volcanic eruptions long before Harbor Point had a name. The battered skeleton of a communications tower rose crookedly at the center, its metal legs half swallowed by moss and rust. As soon as they reached it, Ranger stopped abruptly, his entire body angled toward the tree line, tail low. The formation Jason knew meant detection, not fear, but calculation. Jason scanned the shadows. They're here, he whispered. Hensley drew a deep breath. You need to hear the truth, Cole, before they catch us. Jason kept his attention forward. Make it fast. Blue Rock is a front, Hensley said. The real operation belongs to a private conglomerate. They're extracting something under the water seam, something not listed in any federal registry. Minerals? No. Energy? Jason felt a cold prickle travel down his spine. Explain. The water vein beneath this ridge, Raymond called it a singing vein for a reason. It carries harmonic pressure unlike anything recorded. Inside, it is a form of kinetic resonance that can be converted. Pure, renewable, unregulated. If controlled, it could supply entire coastlines. Jason processed that. And if disrupted? Hensley looked grim. It could destabilize the ridge and everything built on it. The whole coastline could slump. Not instantly, but enough to destroy Harbor Point piece by piece. Jason clenched his jaw. Ranger stiffened further, muscles rising under his fur like drawn cords. Through the mist, faint beams of white light flickered, flashlights sweeping the woods. Multiple angles, multiple men. They're tracking your signature, Hensley said softly. They know you accessed the chamber. Jason adjusted his stance slightly, enough to shield Ranger with his own body. Are they here for me? Hensley didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Jason exhaled slowly, anger and clarity rising together. You used the wrong words earlier, he said. You said they accelerated the project. That means you've been involved? Hensley closed his eyes briefly as if weighed down by the confession. I was part of the oversight team 10 years ago. They promised environmental restoration contracts. They buried the truth. When I tried to expose it, I was pushed out. But they kept my clearance to manipulate field movements. Jason stared at him. So, you didn't bring me into a mission? No, Hensley said, but I'm trying to help you get out alive. Ranger's head swung sharply toward the far slope. Men emerged through the fog, 4 at first, then 6, carrying heavy gear bags and short-barrel rifles built for close quarters. Jason recognized the formation immediately. Containment unit. Not Blue Rock contractors, private tactical operators, the kind used by corporations that couldn't afford the law to intervene. Ranger let out one low growl, measured, steady, not aggressive, but resolute. He had once been trained to face armed units in conflict zones. That training lived in his posture now. Jason placed a steady hand on Ranger's back. Stay close. The men spread out, forming a semicircle. One called out, Petty Officer Jason Cole, stand down and step away from the dog." Jason's pulse sharpened. They knew his rank. They knew his identity. Hensley leaned close. "They're not here to capture. They're here to erase." Ranger's muscles tightened further, the silent agreement between man and dog growing stronger. Jason lifted his chin. "If they collapse this ridge, Harbor Point goes with it." "They don't care," Hensley said. "They only care about the vein." The tactical unit advanced. Jason scanned the terrain in seconds. Slope, tree density, footing, the tower's weak structure. He found no good escape route. Not yet. Ranger stepped forward, calm but ready. The lead operator raised his voice. "Last warning, Cole. This site is off registry. You don't belong here." Jason let the silence stretch until it became its own declaration. Then he said one thing. "Neither do you." The man signaled. Two operators raised suppression guns. Jason moved instantly, pushing Ranger aside just as the first round cracked. A sharp, unnatural tremor rolled beneath their feet. The earth responded before any of the men could. The ridge groaned louder than before, as if the collapse they triggered had awakened something deeper. Jason felt the ground shift, just centimeters, but enough to show the mountain was stirring, enough to spell catastrophe. Ranger barked once, loud and decisive, staring at Jason as if demanding he understand the urgency. Something beneath the ridge was changing fast, and whatever it was, they were running out of time. Rain hammered the ridge in relentless sheets, turning every rock slick and every breath sharp with cold. The tremor that rolled beneath the earth had frozen everyone, the mercenaries, Hensley, Jason, and Ranger, in a single suspended moment, like nature itself had warned them all at once. But the operators recovered first. The man at the front raised his fist, a silent command learned from years of movements in unmarked zones. Jason recognized the formation tightening, the shift in their weight, the way their fingers hovered near triggers. These were not amateurs. They were trained to erase quietly, efficiently, and they had numbers. Ranger inched closer to Jason, those calm, steady eyes fixed on the men in a way that reminded Jason of the desert rescue years ago, when the dog recognized an ambush a full second before any human understood what was happening. Jason lowered his voice to barely a whisper. "Not yet." The lead operator stepped forward. "Whatever you found under that building is no longer relevant," he said. "You have 10 seconds to comply." Jason didn't answer. Something felt wrong, beyond the weapons, beyond the mission. The ground beneath his boots vibrated again. This time, the tremor carried a rhythmic interval. He felt it in his chest, a pulse out of sync with the storm. Ranger's head snapped toward the cliffside. Every muscle in his frame stiffened in a single unified response. Jason knew that stance. It was the stance Ranger held before explosive shock waves underground. The dog glanced at Jason with a sharp, urgent expression that communicated one thing. Move now. Jason grabbed Hensley's arm and hissed, "Down!" He pulled the older man with him just as the ridge shook violently. A deep rumble rose from the cliff like the roar of a leviathan waking. The ground fissured without warning, breaking into jagged cracks that shot across the clearing. One mercenary lost his footing first, then another. The lead operator shouted, fall back now." But the ridge didn't care who commanded whom. A thunderous roar tore through the earth as a slab of basalt near the tower collapsed, carrying two operators with it. Their silhouettes vanished in a whirl of dust and rain. The remaining men scattered instinctively to stable ground, but the only direction left was toward Jason. Ranger leapt in front of Jason with a fierce determination, his bark erupting through the storm like a warning siren. He wasn't attacking. He was claiming ground, a territorial stance that forced the mercenaries to slow, recalibrate. Jason knew he had only seconds of breathing room. He dragged Hensley toward the far edge of the clearing where the trees gathered more densely. "Move!" Behind them, another crack opened, swallowing part of the trail. The mountain was sending a message. The extraction had reached a point of no return. The energy within the vein was destabilizing, pushing back in uncontrolled waves. "The vein's failing," Hensley gasped. Jason didn't spare him a look. "You think?" "No, you don't understand," Hensley said breathlessly. "Raymond theorized that if the resonance spikes too far, the entire coastline could destabilize." Jason stopped. "Meaning what? A quake?" Hensley shook his head. "Not a single quake, a chain of collapses." Ranger growled suddenly, fearless but alert, as shapes emerged through the steam rising from the fractured earth. The mercenaries regrouped with impressive discipline, moving in a staggered pattern that cut off part of Jason's escape route. They didn't shout anymore. Their silence was more dangerous than any gunfire. Jason scanned the terrain. No high ground stable enough to hold. No low ground safe from collapse. The only possible route was a narrow descent trail behind the comms tower, overgrown with moss and slick soil, a path Ranger had avoided earlier because of its tilt. But now, it was the only option. Jason pointed. "There!" Ranger bolted forward, claws finding impossible grip. Jason pushed Hensley ahead. Behind them, the mercenaries opened fire, not to kill, but to force them downward. Suppression patterns. They wanted to funnel Jason into a direction. That was bad. Jason realized too late that they were being herded. At the bottom of the descent trail, barely visible through the fog, stood a dark metal structure built into the cliff, rectangular, reinforced, humming faintly with machinery. A Blue Rock access station. No, not Blue Rock. Something older, something classified. "That's not on any map," Jason muttered. "It's one of the original monitoring sites," Hensley said with a breathless dread. "They sealed it years ago." Ranger's growl deepened, not from aggression, but unease, a sound that seemed to vibrate with the same rhythm coming from beneath the ground. The operators above them closed in, forcing Jason toward the structure. One shouted, "Secure the subject! Do not let the dog near the hatch!" That sentence alone chilled Jason. They didn't just want him. They feared Ranger. Jason didn't know why. Yet. The station door stood halfway buried in rockfall. Ranger sniffed the air sharply, then barked once. Jason understood. "There's something inside." Hensley's face stiffened with recognition, as if he had seen a ghost sown from his own regrets. "Cole, that station, it's where Raymond recorded his first anomalies. It's where he vanished." Rain pounded the roof of the structure, and the hum beneath their feet grew louder, almost like a voice pressing upward through stone. Ranger stepped toward the door, muscles taut, eyes fixed with fierce resolve. Jason swallowed. "If we go in, there's no turning back," Hensley finished quietly. The mercenaries breached the top of the slope. Ranger barked in a command tone Jason had only heard twice before, once in combat, once in a collapsed mine. A bark that meant, "Choose now. There is no later." Jason grabbed the half-buried handle of the metal door and pulled. It screeched open. A wave of cold, subterranean air washed over them, carrying the metallic scent of deep earth and something else. Something older, resonant, alive. Jason looked back at Ranger. The dog didn't hesitate. He stepped inside the darkness first. Behind them, the mercenaries closed in. Ahead of them, the unknown pulsed like a heartbeat, and Jason understood why the ridge had been rumbling since dawn. The mountain wasn't collapsing. It was warning them. The descent into the old monitoring station swallowed light so quickly it felt less like entering a structure and more like stepping into the lungs of the mountain itself. Moist air clung to Jason's skin as he followed Ranger through the narrow corridor, Hensley trailing close behind, one hand gripping the wall to steady himself. The hum they had heard outside grew clearer, resolving into a layered resonance, part mechanical, part something deeper, like the steady breath of subterranean water forced through ancient pathways. Jason kept his voice low. "Stay close. If the floor feels unstable, call it out." Ranger moved with sure-footed precision, slowing only when the corridor widened into a small chamber supported by corroded steel beams. Old equipment flickered weakly along the walls, pressure monitors, acoustic receivers, geologic scanning interfaces still glowing with an eerie bluish tint despite decades of abandonment. Jason swept his flashlight across the consoles. Dust lay thick, but the hum beneath the floor told a different story. This place wasn't dead. Something was still drawing power. Hensley stepped forward, breathing unevenly. This station was sealed after Raymond disappeared, but some systems should not be active, not after all this time. Jason checked the nearest panel. "You said he recorded anomalies here. What kind?" "Not normal tremors," Hensley murmured. "Patterns, intervals, almost like—" He stopped himself. Ranger suddenly stiffened. Jason froze beside him. The dog's gaze locked onto a sealed hatch at the far end of the chamber. It was half-rusted, marked with an old DOE emblem, nearly scrubbed clean by time. Jason moved toward it slowly. "Something in there?" Ranger's low, sharp exhale was answer enough. Jason grabbed the handle and pulled. Metal shrieked. Dust fell from the ceiling. The hatch opened only halfway before catching on warped hinges. A second corridor lay beyond, the air colder, the hum louder. Jason squeezed through first. Ranger followed. Hensley hesitated, but the next tremor pushed him inside. The corridor ended at a wide cylindrical room reinforced by curved metal ribs. In the center stood a circular platform, waist-high, with cables snaking into the bedrock below. A machine, bulky, outdated, and unmistakably active, sat atop it, lights pulsing with slow, hypnotic rhythm. Jason approached it with measured steps. Ranger remained at his flank, ears angled sharply forward. "This is a frequency stabilizer," Hensley whispered, "but primitive. One of the early models designed for monitoring water pressure along fault lines." Jason frowned. "Then why does it look like it's working overtime?" Hensley touched the console. The readings were erratic. Pressure spikes, oscillation shears, moments of complete signal dropout. "They fed power back into this system," he said. "Someone tried to force the mountain's resonance into predictable patterns. They didn't understand the vein was alive in a way these machines weren't designed to handle." Ranger barked once, short, urgent, then stepped toward the far wall. Jason followed the direction of his gaze. Something was there. A body, no, a figure, slumped against the wall, covered by a decaying thermal blanket. Jason moved carefully, bracing himself for what he already suspected. When he pulled the blanket away, Hensley gasped. The remains of a man lay beneath it, bones still wrapped in fragments of field gear. A broken recorder rested beside one hand. Jason picked it up. "Is this?" Hensley nodded with a hollow expression. "Raymond?" Ranger sat beside the remains, not afraid, not startled, just steady, vigilant in a way that felt almost reverent, as if he recognized the weight of the moment. Jason turned the recorder over. Miraculously, a small green diode still blinked. If this works, he pressed play, static. Then a faint voice crackling through the distortion. "7th reading today. Pressure too high. Something is pushing back. Machinery won't hold. If they keep drilling, the vein will break." The static surged. "Cole, if anyone finds this, the mountain isn't failing, it's signaling." Then one final whisper, so thin Jason nearly missed it. "Dogs hear it first." The recorder died. Ranger's ears twitched sharply at that last note, as if acknowledging something familiar. Jason felt a chill crawl across his spine. He knew. Hensley nodded slowly. Raymond understood the vein was reacting to intrusion. This wasn't just geology. It was a living system under strain. Before Jason could answer, alarms flared along the chamber walls. Red lights spun in dizzy arcs. The floor vibrated with violent pulsing. Hensley staggered. They must have activated extraction cycles again, restarted the pumps above the ridge. Jason clenched his jaw. The mercenaries? No, Hensley said with sudden dread. A remote failsafe, automatic. When the mountain destabilizes too far, it dumps all remaining pressure into the drainage wells. He pointed to the machine in the center. This entire monitoring station is about to collapse. Ranger barked sharply and sprinted toward the hatch, urging them out. Jason didn't hesitate. He grabbed Hensley by the arm and ran. They reached the main corridor as a violent tremor rolled through the floor. Panels split. Dust rained from overhead. The steel beams groaned with the sound of surrender. Ranger glanced back only once before pushing forward with unyielding force. The dog seemed to know exactly where the floor remained stable, guiding them through the shaking tunnels. Jason used the wall to keep balance as a blast of warm air shot through a new fissure, a warning of deeper pressure ruptures. They barreled into the first chamber just as part of the ceiling collapsed behind them. The station was falling apart. Ranger dashed toward the exit hatch. Jason and Hensley scrambled after him. Another tremor hit, stronger than any before, and Jason felt the floor tilt beneath his boots. Ranger reached the hatch first and spun, barking at Jason with intense urgency. "Move!" Jason shoved Hensley through, then hauled himself after him. The instant they cleared the doorway, a deafening roar thundered through the station. A breathable rush of cold outside air hit Jason's face as the structure below imploded. Rocks sheared downward in cascading waves. The ground convulsed. Ranger lunged backward, tackling Jason off the collapsing edge. They rolled across the wet ground as the earth swallowed the monitoring station whole. When the tremors finally subsided, Jason pushed himself upright, coughing. Hensley lay beside him, shaken but alive. Ranger stood at the edge of the sinkhole, staring into the settling dust. Jason moved to his side. Below, nothing remained of the structure, not even the machine. The mountain had consumed everything. Hensley exhaled shakily. It did it deliberately to protect itself. Jason nodded slowly. And to protect the vein? Ranger looked toward the ridge where the operators had last been. Jason followed his gaze. No movement. No voices. only rain and distant thunder. "This isn't over," Jason said quietly. "They'll come again, and whatever they wanted, it wasn't just data." Ranger stepped closer, leaning firmly against Jason's leg, a silent promise. They would face whatever came next together, and high above them the ridge rumbled once more, not a warning, but a signal, a calling. The mountain wasn't done with them yet. In the end, Jason and Ranger did not just save a mountain, a water vein, or a forgotten piece of land. They uncovered something far more enduring, an unseen order woven through creation, a quiet miracle that speaks not in thunder, but in the soft rhythms beneath our feet. Some say God reveals himself this way, not always in burning bushes or blazing skies, but in small warnings, in gentle signals, in the courage to listen when everyone else turns away. Perhaps the real miracle was not the mountain's voice, but the way it awakened something inside Jason, a reminder that no one is too lost to be called back into purpose, and no journey is too broken for God to guide home again. And maybe in our own lives, the signs are there too. The moment we feel protected when we should have fallen, the quiet nudge steering us away from harm, the unexpected kindness that feels too perfectly timed to be coincidence. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment telling us which moment stayed with you. And if you believe in miracles, small or great, make sure to subscribe for more stories that remind us that God still works, still heals, and still watches over us. May the Lord bless you, protect your home, strengthen your days, and surround you with the quiet miracles you didn't even know were coming.